Hi everyone, welcome back. Once again, I am Erin Barker with the StoryCollider, and now we're going to get started talking about how you can start developing a story to share with your letter recipients. Now, we want to start with the first ingredient here, the cornerstone of the ingredients of story, which is meaningful events that our believable characters will experience. So, how do we come up with a good event that's going to resonate with our audience? I want to start out by playing you a clip from a story by physicist Sarah Demers that she shared at our show with Yale University in 2017. And I want you to think about the event here that Sarah is sharing with us and what's interesting or intriguing or engaging to the audience about that. And especially pay attention to how the audience responds throughout. And just to set up this clip, this is from a story when Sarah was in college and she was working in a lab. And this is the event that sort of inspired her to pursue science on a deeper level.
So any kind of nice description or plot that you try to make is going to be smeared out and it's going to be messy, which is why it was really terrible that one day I made a gorgeous plot. And I remember thinking, what have I done? Because every time I made a plot that had any interesting feature in it, it was a bug in my code, right? And I went back and I looked and I just couldn't find a mistake. What have I done? So eventually I had to swallow my pride and take my plot to my advisor, say, what have I done? And he laughed when he saw the plot, and he said, Sarah, if you'd made that plot 20 years ago, you would have won a Nobel Prize. And so I laughed too, because I thought, this is probably a great joke, but I did not leave his office. I just stayed there. And he realized, oh, she's still confused. And he told me, what's happened is you've discovered the Z boson. That code that you wrote to try to grab taus, it's been faked by electrons. And so you've got a beautiful, beautiful events where you have a Z boson created 2 electrons. It's a mass peak. That bell-shaped curve is the mass of the Z boson. And I said, oh, thank you very much, and walked out of his office. This is where you might start judging me. What I was thinking was, oh my, Z bosons are real.
All right, so what's interesting about this event? If you're anything like me or many people in the audience, I'm sure you might not be familiar with Z bosons or some of the things that Sarah is talking about in this clip, but I still feel very invited into this moment with Sarah. I feel invited in by her humility and by her humor, by the fact that she is taking us on this journey with her. She's not letting us know, her perspective from present day. She's staying in that moment of that perspective that she had at the time, bringing us along with her. And what you might also notice is this is a moment of change. This isn't huge change. Sarah doesn't become a totally different person in this clip, but it's a moment where she experiences wonder. And as a result, her thinking begins to shift, specifically as pertains to her science career and education. So I want to take a moment and have you brainstorm some events that you might share in your story. And like Sarah, think about moments of change. Think about moments when science became real to you, when you fell in love with science, a moment when maybe you realized that it was possible for you to become a scientist. Jot some of those down, pause it if you need some extra time to think. But as you might notice, change is essential in storytelling. Change is what gives a story purpose and meaning. If you don't have change in your story, it's really just an anecdote. It's a nice memory or it's a nice moment. Change is what really drives a story, and it's what keeps our attention in a story. So over the course of your story, you'll want to change from one thing to another. So for example, in Sarah's story, she changes from someone who views science as something kind of abstract and intangible to someone who really realizes how real it is. I want to also invite you to listen to some other stories just to get some examples. We've included in the workbook a playlist of scientist origin stories that might be relevant. I want to especially mention The Gift of Feeling Okay by Joe Normandin is a great example of a scientist origin story. but there are many other great ones to listen to. So you may want to pause here and listen to some of these stories and come back. But if not, we'll jump right into sensory memories. So, as you may remember, we talked about transportation in the intro to this, how essential transportation is for bringing people into these moments with us. Um, and one way to transport someone into your story is to bring them into a scene, a very specific moment, and to provide those sensory details that will allow them to really connect with that moment. So pick one of the events that you brainstormed on your brainstorm list. And at the time of your story, do you remember seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching anything? Make a note. When I think of, for example, Joe Normanden's story, I always think of that moment when we can see him in this library 2 towns over, hiding away from everyone he knows, desperately looking for answers. When I think about, for example, Edith Gonzalez's story on the playlist that we shared with you, I think of the clacking sound of her shoes that she's wearing when she's not dressed in the archaeologist uniform. In Ken Ono's story about the freakish yellow couch, I think of that image of the yellow couch that he had this epiphany on. With Catherine McDonald's story, I think of the feeling of the shark skin that she describes. So think of some sensory details that might bring people into these moments with you. Now, we've also included in the workbook this worksheet for scene building. And go ahead and fill this out. You have some boxes here that will just ask you for little details pertaining to your story that will help draw the listeners in, that will help them be able to visualize your story. Not all of these will be relevant to your story, but many of them will be. So just try to fill out all the ones that you can. Now, as you start to construct your story, you'll also want to think about yourself as a character. You are the most important character in your story. And if the letter readers connect with you as a character, as a person, they will definitely be engaged in your story. So this is a study that was done with Fermilab, and I believe has been done several times over the years, in which they asked middle schoolers to draw what they think a scientist looks like. And this is what they drew. As you can see, we have several bald scientists here. We have a lot of glasses, lab coats with a lot of buttons, perhaps too many buttons, some would say, mixing up some dangerous chemicals for the most part. And then they brought these middle schoolers to Fermilab for the day to spend time with the scientists. And afterwards, this is what those same students drew. They're drawing women, they're drawing people of color, they're looking much more approachable, everyday clothing, smiles on their faces. This is the power of letting people get to know you as a scientist. It can change perceptions of who can be a scientist and what a scientist looks like. So that's an extremely powerful thing to share your identity as a scientist in your stories with your letter readers. I want to play a quick clip from Dr. Latasha Wright, a biologist who's describing herself at the start of her story.
And my brothers and my dad would put crabbing lines out to catch crabs, and I would just run wild on the beach and go crazy and, kind of primal. And I would think about like all of the animals in the water, and I would fantasize about them, and I would think about what they are doing, or who are they hanging out with. And I was obsessed with dolphins. I loved them. I thought they were beautiful. They were smart, and obviously, just like me. Um, so I wanted to be one, and I wanted to be one so bad that I had a dolphin name, and. And I had, okay, don't tell anybody. This is a total secret. But I had a dolphin name that was a lot of clicks and whistles. And I made my whole family call me by this name. So don't tell anybody. I can trust you. And so then that just meant I was going to be a scientist, okay? Because I was not this flipper crap, like a real thing.
So you can see, just judging by the audience's response, how impactful the way that Latasha has introduced herself is. She could have just said, I was a kid who wanted to be a scientist, but she showed us what it meant to be a kid who was already assuming that scientist identity. She showed us in a really powerful way that invited us to get to know her.
And
So to think about how you can allow your letter recipients to get to know you in the same way, I have a couple of prompts here. At the time of my story, my friends would describe me as, maybe jot down a note now. How would your friends have described you at the start of your story before this moment of change has happened? At the time of my story, the things I loved most were. Give us a few examples. Sometimes this can reveal a lot. And think about how you can show who you were. I hope this has been helpful to help you get started telling your stories to your letter recipients. It's a really powerful thing that you're doing to share your stories with these students. So I'm so excited for all of you. If you'd like to learn more about how to tell a story, because again, this was our quick and dirty 15-minute version, you can check out our education program at storycollider.org/education and go more in depth with one of our courses. We offer public workshops for individuals every other month online. And we also offer workshops for private groups as well. So check that out if you'd like to learn more. Or consider pitching us your story. If you put together a great story that you'd like to share, we would love to have you on our stage as well. And you can find out more about that at storycollider.org/submissions. And of course, feel free to reach out to me, Erin, at StoryCollider.org, if you have any questions about StoryCollider, you'd like to get more involved. It's been really a pleasure sharing with you a little bit about storytelling today, and I hope this has helped you get a good start to telling your story.